I think everybody is trying to figure this out. Think about it was only 18 months ago that we had our Chat GPT moment, so everybody's trying to figure that out. But Walmart's we describe ourselves as people-led, tech-powered, and so we do want our people doing a lot of the work, but having the Gen AI or the assistant simplifying things for them.
I'm excited to introduce my guest, David Glick. David is Senior Vice President of Enterprise Business Services at Walmart. Welcome, and thank you for being here, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Vahe. I'm looking forward to it.
Tell us what Enterprise Business Services at Walmart actually means.
Yeah, we like to say it's everything you need to run the enterprise. So when you check out at Walmart, either in the stores or on the website, you use our payment system. When we close the books, it's my fintech systems. I own all the people technology, so understanding where our people are, how much they're paid, and so on, and making sure they get paid on time. And then our associate digital experience, which is how do we make a delightful experience for our associates every time they interact with our systems or open their laptops. And finally, we own philanthropy and governance and technology around legal. In addition to the technology, my team owns the operations of finance and of people. And so one of the things we've done is moved the operations close to engineering. And so we can have the engineers sit with the operations folks and figure out how to streamline and optimize their processes and automate some of them, which drives better customer experience for our associates as well as cost reduction.
I think I saw that as a theme generally from your posts and your interviews that I think you and Walmart are driving the strategy of building more in-house now than you used to. Can you elaborate?
One of the things that I found over the last many years is that many third-party systems don't scale to Walmart scale. They're thousands of people or tens of thousands of people, not millions of folks. And so we do, every time we look at a system, we want to decide, should we build or should we buy? And obviously everybody does that. My experience says that when we build, we can build all the different ramifications or all the different optimizations in, and it allows us to be more agile rather than waterfall. Like if you have to take something out of the box, it usually puts you ahead a few weeks, months, or years. But if you want to move this button over here or change a workflow or take into account a special use case, I love the ability that we can do that in a sprint rather than having the right business requirements and go back to the vendor and so on to get these changes put in. So obviously, sometimes it's right to buy and sometimes it's right to build. But I do admit I have a bias towards building and having control.
Yeah, it makes, especially at your scale, of course, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's not many companies are at the scale that Walmart is.
Yeah, really, zero companies. One company is at the scale of Walmart.
Exactly. And but if you're managing a team, and then especially with this emerging technology, AI as a word is maybe not emerging, but Gen AI certainly is, and it's penetrating a lot of processes and things. Like, how do you manage then the what projects are being done, how you do that, how you do the knowledge transfer, and all those important things around that?
Yeah, one of the great things about being at Walmart is Doug McMillan has been a real advocate of building our technology team. We're up to 25,000 engineers strong, and so if you think about companies who can do digital transformation, there's a very small number of those, and I believe we're one of those. And you look at, obviously, there's big tech companies who have more engineers than us, but not very many of them. And so I think you'd throw us in with the Googles and Microsofts of the world in terms of being a big technology organization. Doug came out at CS this year and has been pretty consistent that he wants us to be a leader in Gen AI. And so not just let's find a few places to use it, but every single organization should think about how can we use this next technology and be on the forefront of them. One of the cool things we did that I hadn't seen before is what we called idea jams. And so we get the business folks in a room for an hour or an hour and a half and explain what can Gen AI do for you, or what can Gen AI do generally, and then have them come back and say, oh, here's some use cases which we think are relevant to us. And we have the engineers in the room with them saying, categorizing, oh, we could do this would be harder, or just taking away all these things and let us come back and pick three, pick one or pick three, and let's go dive into those, because there's sort of infinite opportunity at this point.
Yes, it really seems like that. And then when you focus so much on Gen AI, I mean, certainly the question, at least I think, arises: what's the role of humans, and how is the interaction with humans? Is it even necessary, or is it like totally autonomous, or how do you cooperate or incorporate humans with AI, or the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is trying to figure this out. Think about, it was only 18 months ago that we had our Chat GPT moment, so everybody's trying to figure that out. But Walmart's, we describe ourselves as people-led, tech-powered, and so we do want our people doing a lot of the work, but having the Gen AI or the assistant simplifying things for them. And so, a simple use case is, oh, we need to do a press release. So let's have the AI write a first draft of that. And then, we can have the human touch it up and get it to be right. Or we start each project by writing down principles, like North Star guiding principles. And so I asked one of my team members to do that, and he sent me, these well-written, authentic guiding principles. I'm like, oh, this is great. And he's like, yeah, I used my assistant, which is our Gen AI tool, which is built into our consumer grade associate facing tool. And so I thought that was great that we're starting to use it every day, and we can look at what are people using it for. And so lots of companies are saying, oh, from tops down, we'll tell you what you should do with Gen AI, or we'll hire a consultant to tell us what to do. But really, we've come with both tops down, we have some things we want to do, but also sort of a crowdsourced, bottoms up, what are people using this for? And then if we see what people are using it for, that will inform what's the next thing we want to work on.
I think that is a really interesting approach, right? From coming from both sides, basically, because it is a very new technology, and it's hard from either direction only to approach it, right?
Yeah, I think back to this book I read like 25 years ago, Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits. And I think one of the 7 habits was think from a position of abundance, not scarcity. So many people say, oh, we can only do two Gen AI projects. Like, let's choose carefully. And it's like, we can do as many as we can think of and that are useful. And so one of the fun things about this is coming, oh, we could do this or we could do that, and let's do it all. And so being at a company that has the resources and have, both the resources in terms of cash flow, but also in terms of engineering talent, really opens up and makes it more fun than being at some place where they don't have the resources.
That makes sense. But in your size, the question, I mean, this question I usually don't ask, but in your size, I almost have to ask, do you actually train from ground up like language models, or do you like use fine tune or work with some of those?
Yeah, another good thing, I feel like this is a good choice we made, is we have a team in the platform organization who's built a platform called Element, and below that are open source AI, open source LLMs, and non-open source and hyperscalers, and there's all these options. And then I, as an app developer, get to sit on top of that, and so I can just call Element, and they will get the right AI to answer the right questions at the right time for the right cost. And so, well, that is a good question. Fortunately, I'm not answering that question for the enterprise. I just call our centralized platform, and they do a lot of that.
There are though difficulties though, right? Because unfortunately, prompt engineering is still a thing, right? It would be great if it wouldn't, but it still is a thing. And I wonder how you manage if you have like several different language models, let's say open source or whatever language models. Like, do you have like a semantic kernel that translates then a query for a certain language model, or do you just trust that it will be good enough to understand the same like prompt?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's early days, and we're like, it's been 18 months, so it shouldn't be that early days. But if you think about it in the grand scale and the grand scheme of things, it's still pretty early days. um, one of the things I always think back to is like the Netflix. You remember Netflix did this competition um, for the recommendations engine, and the person who won, or the team that won, took a bunch of different engines and averaged them, and that was the winning solution, or a bunch of different algorithms. And our chief economist at a previous company taught me that. And so one of the interesting things is if you take a 2x2 and you say, I'm running this model and it agrees with it. I'm running two models, they both agree. Okay, great. They both say this is a good thing. Oh, we should probably go with that. Or they both say this is a bad thing. We should go with that. But the interesting things are when you run two different models and get two different answers. And so you can have a human go dig into that and try to figure out like why it came up with different answers, as well as what we're going to do and how we're going to leverage that to get the right answer. And I think that's where
Yeah.
the fun comes.
True, true. Basically, you're building an ensemble of these things, like almost like a decision, like a random forest kind of thing, where you have several models, and then you choose the
You have an
obvious.
algorithm of algorithms.
Yes, interesting. Yes, and but you also have, I assume, lots of internal knowledge and things that you want to incorporate into your assistants. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to oversimplify it, but I'll give you an example. I own the benefits help desk. So when an associate starts, they get a 300-page benefits guide, and they can read it and try to figure out, do they have a 401k, or can they get an arm surgery, elbow surgery, and it's hard to know. And so they call the benefits help desk and ask them. And there's several hundred agents who have read the guide, but the guide changes all the time. And so think about like what is better at memorizing a 300-page document, an agent or an LLM? And I think the answer over the long term is an LLM. and um, and so putting that into a vector DB is actually pretty easy. Like I had a principal engineer go do that, and it took him a weekend, and it was able to answer 90% of the questions pretty. The agent said these are the right answers, but you don't want to give people the wrong answer. So the hard part is not the technology. It's not sticking a benefits guide into the vector DB. It's trying to ensure that giving how do we turn a probabilistic answer from the LLM into a deterministic answer? Because if you tell an associate, oh, you qualify for this surgery, and they go spend $20,000 on a surgery, and then it turns out that they didn't, that's a life-changing event. And so it's important to us to figure out where we need the LLM to sort of give source material, but have a human or some other mechanism to make sure that it's right. And so that's the fun and interesting part.
I feel the same. The integration with human and AI is the most interesting part, actually. And it's also, I think, very interesting because it's very dynamic and changing, because with every added capability of AI, this needs to be rethought again. Like, how are these two actually cooperating meaningfully with each other, right? And that, I think that's very important also from an efficiency point, which is, of course, one of your hallmarks if you look at your, fascinating CV. Efficiency has been one like theme across that. Like, how do you think about that with Gen AI now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because most of the time automation is much easier than the other pieces. Like, the way I think about it is automation, adoption, and audit. So first we have to write software, and we all know how to do that, and it's actually pretty simple. Especially with Gen AI, you get a huge lever, and so you can, like I said, in a week, you can put things in the vector database and figure it out. And then the second piece is adoption, and like how do you fit this into the workflow? How do you get the humans to use it? How do you make it part of everyday life? And then the third is audit. We should do quality audits of everything humans do, but the AI can screw things up much faster than humans. And so we have to have the right mechanisms to make sure it doesn't run off and do the wrong thing at scale. And so that's been my whole career, whether it's pricing automation, inventory ordering, fulfillment center, any of those things. You can apply that principle of automation, adoption, and audit to the adoption piece is the thing that I've really made a career of, which is how do we have an engineer build something that's actually useful to the humans? And then how do we get the humans to buy into it and say, this is actually making my life easier. And of course, in the background, it's like, what is the future for me? And what we found is that the best people actually turn into like product managers. When you do a big transformation, people who are domain experts have access to all of these engineers to help them do their job better. And so rather than making widgets or being an operator, they can go be a product manager, and that leads them into a whole new career path.
It reminds me very much on Steve Jobs' story about his product managers who choose to be that, but they could actually be something different. But they chose to be this because they were so much interested in solving that problem. And so obviously those people very much relate to the issues because they went through them and can much better design systems around this if they have the skills for doing that.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes we have people push back, and like you have a whole engineering team who are listening to you, wanting to build exactly the thing that you want. How wonderful is that? And so whether you put the job class of engineer or product manager or whatever, being a product owner and getting to design your own system that takes away all the frustration that you've had from either doing things manually or using a third-party system that doesn't quite meet your needs. Like this is a exciting time for the best of the people who are using the system and helping us drive it forward.
Yeah. That brings me to an interesting question. You just said for the best of the people, right? Do you think that like you have such a large organization, obviously there are differences in people preferences, but also in skill levels and other things. Does everybody benefit the same way from AI? Like, is it enabling everybody, or do you see a huge difference in who's benefiting from it?
I think you probably sort of the middle 90% or the middle 80% all kind of get the same benefits. You've got some folks at the top in particular who are like, I'm going to use this. I'm going to figure out how to do my job, and they're going to be 10 times more productive. I remember a story, and this doesn't have to do with AI, but I don't know if you remember, Tim Ferriss wrote this book, The 4-Hour Workweek, and he talked about virtual assistants in India. And there was someone at a previous company who was on the seller sales team, signing up sellers for the marketplace. And she found a virtual assistant in India for whatever, $4 an hour, and she would send them a list of leads every night before she went home. And she'd come in, and there would be all this data about these sellers, and so she knew who to call and what buttons to press, and she was like 10 times more productive. And finally, someone went to her and said, "What are you doing?" And then we went back and built a process and scaled it up. And so we want to give people, like, the creativity is going to come from the humans. And so we want to give them as much leeway in being creative. And then how do we harvest each of those great ideas and build it at scale so that everybody gets the benefit?
Before we go to retail, because I'm very interested on that, can I because this question was popped up in my mind before, when you were said building assistants, are you actually doing different modalities like voice also, or is it like text-based?
It's primarily text, or what I'm doing is primarily text-based. I mean, it's interesting because when you have customer service contacts from outside, you have probably mostly email, a little bit of phone. In our associate or benefits help desk, it's like 99% phone, which is a much harder problem than parsing emails because you have to do it in real time. But one of the exciting things is how do we pipe that data into our LLM, and the LLM can tell the agent who's talking to the associate, the LLM can say, ask them this question, or it can say, oh, we know who this person is. They are salaried and they work out of this state and they've been here this long, and that will inform, like, do they qualify for a 401k, or do they have insurance for this surgery, and so on. Augmenting the human in real time is actually a quite hard problem, but it's becoming, as these LLMs get less latent and more performant, it's becoming possible for sure.
Yeah, basically like a just-in-time assistant that like would literally follow even or not follow, but immediately answer questions and augment the data to answer the best possible way, basically.
Yeah, and one of the things, like the best agent is probably going to be better than the LLM, right? They have been working at this for 10 years. They know what the benefits guide said, all these things. But one of the most expensive parts about running a help desk or running any operation is training. And so if you can have someone on day one, have the LLM walk them through the questions they need to ask, that's going to take the training time way down. At the previous company, we went from customer service using green screens and command line tools to a UI. And the old timers were like, oh, this is horrible. It takes me twice as long. But the folks who were coming on were like, this is much easier to use, and I don't need to set my alias files in Unix and all this stuff. And so making it simpler for the user is one of the key components to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me switch a little bit to retail, because when I did my MBA, I think probably 5 or 6 of the case studies were about Walmart, how great this company is, how well they manage certain things. So how do you think that AI is impacting retail?
That's a great question. I think Walmart has been running stores for a long time and are the best in the world at doing that. In fact, a previous company, we hired a bunch of people from Walmart because we were like, they're the best operators in the world and we want some of that. And so we're great at that. E-commerce is relatively new. I mean, we're I think the second biggest e-commerce company in the world or in the country. So we're not nothing. But how do we build a better search, right? How do we build a more personalized search? How do we rank things correctly? How do we write product detail pages? All of that on e-commerce is like a wide open space where we can play in, and I think there's vast opportunities to improve. If you think about the stores, how can we? And this is probably more AI than Gen AI, but how can we figure out what inventory to count? Like, not all inventory is created equal, and you can do a wall-to-wall count once a year, and that costs you X dollars. But if you say, this thing turns a lot faster, so we should count it more often, or we should count it less often, or we should do it with RFID. All of those things are sort of anomaly detection and sophisticated algorithms that we used to call machine learning. Now we call AI. Maybe we'll call it Gen AI in the future. But one of the cool things about this whole Gen AI revolution that we're in is it's brought AI to the forefront as well. And so call it sophisticated algorithms. Lots of people call lots of stuff AI, but even a decision tree is AI, right? Using even less sophisticated algorithms can help you with anomaly detection and so on. And when I try to explain AI to folks, I think about, if I'm a human, I say, oh, if this happens and this happens and this happens, I know the root cause with this. And I can do that with maybe 2, maybe 3 variables in my head. But if I want 100 variables or 1,000 variables, or, they're training 128 billion variable models now or whatever, a computer has to do that. And so being able to find anomalies in this multivariate space is another fun and exciting area, which is not really Gen AI, but it's AI/ML.
Yeah. And a big topic, not only in retail, but in many other areas as well. I mean, you were talking about by e-commerce search and ranking and so on. Like I always argued that with AI, what you can really do now is deliver a much more intimate experience for somebody. Like just imagine, I would expect actually at some point that if I open the Walmart e-commerce site, it looks entirely different than if my wife is opening it, because like I have entirely different preferences. If we just assume for a moment that for whatever reason Walmart knows that, like it could even generate different descriptions of products based on my preference. Do you see that like happening?
Yeah, I mean, people have been working on personalization for decades. And first it was just people who bought this book, bought that book, and let's put that at the top. And then it was like, let's use some sort of simple machine learning, and then let's use AI, and now let's use generative AI. But I think the generative AI was a step change in being able to understand what are the attributes about you and how do we build that into our model. In my car, we've got a nav system, and I pull out my driveway and it always wants me to turn left because that's the shortest distance into Seattle, but I always want to turn in right because I go up the straight road rather than the windy road, and I'm waiting for my car to learn that every single time it tells me to turn left, I turn right, and so it should personalize that for me. And so even the most sophisticated automakers or the automaker still struggles with this personalization, and so it'll be great for us to jump ahead and be able to build a whole different store for you. And you may come to the video games tag, and your wife may go to the apparel tag as the homepage, or vice versa.
Yeah, I feel that too, because ultimately sales is a lot about building intimacy, right, and understanding, and having empathy towards your potential or real customer. And with this, you can do it in a much deeper level, because we can argue a lot about intelligence and how intelligent is it and so on. But I think one thing that is really answered is that these LLMs are really mastered language. The content might be wrong from time to time, but the way they present it is so convincing because they honestly have mastered, the language part of it, right? So we could actually tap into that.
That's the most scary. If I think there was a description of someone as often wrong, never uncertain, and those are that like they are so charismatic and so convincing that even if it's a wrong answer, you'll believe them. And I think the LLM has some of that problem now too.
Yeah, I wrote a blog post that was picked up about that, because ultimately I was asking a question about the color of the uniform of the National Guard during the Napoleonic Wars, and I was very sure what that color is, and it answered an opposite thing, but so convincingly. And I promise you, I knew that information, and I don't know it now anymore because I'm now confused myself. Like I unlearned it because I read all these things about it. It's like, is this true? And then now I don't even remember which one is the true answer. That can be dangerous to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mentioned automation adoption audit. One of the audits we can do is ask the AI questions that we know the answers to.
Yeah.
And that will tell us if it's good or not, because and I read about some effect. I don't remember what it was called, but people will say, oh, this doesn't work because I know the answer to this. But then they'll go to something that they don't understand and they'll believe the LLM when
Yes.
they should carry over this healthy skepticism. It's a hard problem, this whole content moderation and getting the right answers is, I'm glad that that's not my full-time job.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I have to say, an interesting field though, right? Because lots of interesting things are happening there. And one of the things that is happening is this verifier models, right? That you were also talking about, but also like literally training a model for verification purposes. That of course is shifting computational power needs from training to inference, which is not desirable. But then again, if it's that much better, it might be the way to go, right? That is, I think it's an interesting field. And you brought a very important point. Like some answers already, right? So there is a technique where you can actually embed automatically some questions into this, where you know the answer, and then based on that, assume if the rest is correct or not.
And it's sort of like in writing unit tests, you want to assert if this is one, like test it if it's one, and I know the answer if the input is one or the input is zero, they should at least give the right answers there.
So I also read one of your articles, a very interesting article, and you were also there mentioning that besides operational tasks, you would also like to see it at some point in strategic decision making, AI in strategic decision making. Like, can you elaborate?
Obviously, we can streamline things, and I've spent a lot of time, driving optimized operations over the last, couple of decades. I remember reading or listening to NPR probably 15 years ago where they were talking about Auto Steve. At Apple, they were trying to capture all of the inputs that Steve Jobs had when he made a decision, and then capture his decision and see if they could build a machine learning model to replicate him. They called it Auto Steve, or they called that project that. And today I read on Google News. In my personalized feed, I get stuff about Bitcoin, right? And it says like Bitcoin, the AI has been trained to tell us what the Bitcoin value is going to be at the end of the year. And like, how do I know if it's right or wrong? But, with these multivariate models with, hundreds of billions or trillions of inputs, it'll be fascinating to see if it starts getting things right. It reminds me of, there was a guy I was interviewing for an intern, I think, and he was like, "Yeah, on my spare time, I write code to figure out who I should bet on in the football games, and I can only beat the spread 51% of the time, so I gave up on it." I'm like, 51%, that's great. Right? You should be able to. Anyway, computers can make these. If they have enough data, they can make good decisions often, even about telling the future.
Yeah, and I think it's very important because the difficulties that we have in many areas, being from environment all the way to healthcare, will require support probably of these kind of systems to actually tackle them and solve, ever more complicated issues, right?
I think in like healthcare is like maybe the killer app for this thing. There's AlphaFold that they just released, which is going to allow us to test millions and millions of drug or protein folding in the same amount of time it took. A tenth of the time it took to do one drug today, you can do millions of these. And for our economy, I don't want to go too far off tangent, but our economy is dependent on good healthcare, and so if we can come up with the right medicines to keep people healthy, that'll be a huge boon.
Yeah, I think so too. It's really difficult topics, right? If you look at some of those things that the more we prolong our lives, we have like more cases of cancer, more cases of things that are really difficult to solve. And I feel like without AI, it's almost impossible to really have a chance on solving those things.
Yeah.
So what is as you touched of it? So I from your positive attitude, I'm 100% convinced of your answer. I'm still going to ask it. What does AI bring us? Good, only good, or are there problems? And if not, then tell us why.
There's always going to be problems, but I think it's mostly good. I think about who's going to win. Is it going to be OpenAI? Is it going to be DeepMind? Is it going to be somebody else? Like, who knows? But in the end, we're all going to benefit from this. And I think about the same thing with autonomous cars. Is it Tesla? Is it BYD? Is it somebody else who's going to bring us autonomous cars? But in the end, we're going to have less accidents because these folks are spending billions of dollars on NVIDIA clusters and so on, or building their own. But like, I think for the most part, this is all good. I would not want to get scared away from all the good things. Like, you just have to manage problems, be aware with them, and don't have Pollyanna glasses. But you need to manage these things and take the good.
Yeah, I think so too. We probably just need it also for all this, problems to solve, and there will be side effects, and I think there are a lot of voices out there that are very critical, and I can absolutely see that there are risks attached to it. But we can also manage those things, right? It's not like that we're just, just receiving end of it. We can actually design things around how we use it and how it is. Having said that, I would assume that at Walmart you also have like ethical standards and other guidelines for these AI models. Do you also work actively on guardrailing those things, like making sure that certain things are just not possible?
I spent a lot of time with the governance team and the legal team and the HR team, and it's super important that we do the right thing for our associates and do the right things for our customers and keep everybody safe, because as you know, data is the new oil, and privacy is super important. And I'm always skeptical of the term guardrails. These guardrails is like, we're going to make sure that you don't drive off the cliff into the river or into the ocean. But can we be more precise than guardrails? Like, I'd rather have lane lines. Guardrails are, if you miss the lane lines and you're not paying attention and this and that, we're going to save you. But could we be more precise and say, look, you need to be between these lane lines? And obviously, there's philosophers and the best engineering talent in the world and governance and lawyers and everybody who's trying to weigh in on this. And I'm happy that's not my full-time job again. I'm just making widgets, and trying to make them as efficiently as possible.
But that's what I wanted to say, highly efficient ones, right?
Yes.
And that's the fun part of it, right? So what is your prediction about, in retail, what AI can do in terms and I don't want to I'm not talking about numbers and P&L and these things, but in terms of really advancing this level of experience within the next 5 years? Like where do you think we will land in 5 years in terms of what is possible with AI in retail?
Yeah, I mean, I think, marketers, advertisers have been trying to figure out how to put the right thing in front of the right customer at the right time for, millennia, really. And obviously, when you go from having stores where you can change prices once a week, or it's very expensive to change prices or to put something on a different shelf, to an e-commerce site where you can change the price in a flip of a switch, or even the computers change the prices, and you've got automated Google sponsored links and all these things. So we've already seen a big acceleration of putting the right thing in front of customers, and this will just supercharge it. You know, I assume you've read Black Swan, or of Black Swan, and they talk about positive feedback loops. Positive feedback loops are sometimes bad, right? Because it can send things off the guardrail, I guess. But I think we're in a positive feedback loop, right? The more data we have, the more precise we can give you the product that you're looking for. I was talking to a friend the other day when I was out running, and he's like, "You need some new shorts. You lost a bunch of weight. Your shorts are falling down." And I get back, and on Instagram, it shows me, all the advertisements I got were for running shorts. And so I'm like, how do I feel about that? And I better go check my settings and see if it's listening to me. But broadly, I guess if I'm going to have to look at advertisements, I'd rather look at advertisements which are relevant to me than not.
Honestly, I think that maybe advertisements are also just one step, right? Because you could imagine if these things are so correct in the predictions, you could just wake up the next morning with a doorbell and somebody giving you, your next shorts, and then you can send it back or not send it back if you like it. I mean, theoretically, I understand there are lots of legals and other implications to that, but that's certainly the next level of dreaming about, how this could work out.
Well, that's what there was a meme about 10 years ago called "Yesterday Shipping." I don't know if you saw the YouTube video that said the retailers are moving to yesterday shipping, where we'll ship. You go to the website and look at this thing and say, "Oh, we already shipped it to you. It should be on your porch in a few minutes." But one step back from that is putting inventory close to customers drives speed, drives cost reduction, and so what company is within 10 miles of 90% of the people in the US? It's Walmart. And so putting inventory close to customers, Walmart has a huge advantage to that because we have inventory storage places right next to customers. And so ideally, yesterday shipping, we put something on your porch before you ask for it. But one step back from that is we put it in an inventory near you, so you can drive there, or we now do order pickup and delivery where, we do same day shipping from stores, or you can drive to the parking lot and we'll load your trunk. Anyway, putting inventory close to the customer is sort of the holy grail for retailers. And this data, Walmart has more data and more inventory sources than anybody else in the world. And so we should be great at that.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for your time and the insights that you delivered. I mean, it's very refreshing to see this positive attitudes towards AI, I have to say, these days. But I love it, and thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to spread some optimism.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Hybrid Minds. This podcast is brought to you by Cognize, the first of its kind intelligent document processing company, which automates unstructured data with hybrid intelligence and a data-centric AI platform. To learn more, visit cognize.com. And be sure to catch the next episode of Hybrid Minds wherever you get your podcasts.